Okay, so we're at the end of the course, pretty much. We have one more lecture after this one. So the last two will be applications of search and matching models to phenomena that we care about, and where these models can have a real contribution to helping us understand what's going on in the real world. The one today will be discrimination. Next week we'll talk about macroeconomic dynamics, and I'll show you a picture at the end of the lecture that will inspire you to think about next week. Okay, so the plan today will be to look at motivation for what we call discrimination, which means that certain workers of certain types are treated differently for whatever reason. So this could be motivated by racial or gender-related motives. It could be related to statistical inference. So you might use observable characteristics to make inference on the underlying distribution. And of course, these two models, if you think there is discrimination, have different implications for efficiency and for what we should do about it, whether we should intervene, pass laws, maybe try to improve the information available to employers and to employees. There's also a model of discrimination which is based on segregation, which would mean that the classic example is women tend to be hired in industries where they're paid less, and it's almost like a form of discrimination where people are forced into certain job markets without giving them a chance to enter others. So that's another form of discrimination. Here we'll be talking about basically employers choosing to treat people of different types differently. And I'll give you some intellectual background on that, where it came from. This is a rampant problem in the world, even today, obviously, but especially in the United States, but also in Europe, probably also in Asia. So one of the appealing things that I've found is this model by Black in the 1990s actually gets at a point that it's a pushback on a point that was made by the Chicago School, which I will talk about. The Chicago School of thinking about discrimination, which is a fairly sanguine one, a pretty optimistic way of thinking about the market will solve the problem. And I'll tell you about that. And I won't really probably go into this model by Lang and Lehmann, but it's it's a more advanced version of what we're going to talk about today. So if you're interested, you can read that. It's in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. And overall, the whole point today is to give you some insight into the fascinating thing about this model that we've learned about all semester, which can be applied to many other labor problems, but also to problems in the product market and to the financial markets. So you can think about looking for an investor, a hedge fund looking for an investment opportunity, or you can think about looking for different types of art objects, looking for a parking space. All these things can be used as fruitful areas of application for the fundamental model. And sometimes there are these hidden consequences. You can do things that lead to unanticipated consequences, and the policies that we pursue may actually have the wrong effect. And when you have incomplete information, or if you have a search situation where you have random search, this is a fairly frequent outcome. So this is one example of where the search and matching approach would actually undermine the so-called Becker expectation that discrimination is generally not a profitable activity and would eventually just dry up and blow away if we just let the market work. Okay, so that's And again, we've already seen one example of this is when you put in the firing tax in the old original Pissarides model, you have these, you do indeed reduce, the amount of firing, but you also may reduce the amount of hiring. So the net effect of that could actually be that unemployment rises. So it's the same kind of thing we'll see today. So the underlying phenomenon is the fact that we observe something that looks like discrimination. Okay, so this is from Black's paper in 1995 in the Journal of Labor Economics. And it's basically giving some estimates, I think these are like probit estimates of probabilities or that a worker gets a wage that's in excess of what the typical wage offer would be based on a survey of small businesses. So you can see that these are all with standard errors divided into the point estimates, sort of like a type of t-statistic on the right. You might, if you did this again with more modern approaches, correcting for the standard errors in an appropriate way, you might have a different, a less extremely precise estimate that he reports here. But what's interesting is that these are employers themselves discussing their behavior, would say that, we look for people who have above average skills, and if we have an employee who is applying for this job who's not, as Americans would say, Caucasian, this might induce this person to give a less than average wage offer. So you ask, this is just obviously discrimination, right? This is not right. It's probably illegal in most countries, at least on the books. In the United States, it certainly is. But this seems to be the behavior that people are self-reporting. So either they're willingly breaking the law or they're trying to apply some model. Okay, they're basically they have a signal extraction problem. If a person is from a certain group, they assign to it a certain distribution and then make an assessment of the probability that the person has a certain talent or ability comes from a different distribution than the other. So you call that maybe a statistical type of discrimination. This is a fairly widespread result, and I think in some sense this looks like, to me, it looks like just plain discrimination. So it's the question is, can we solve this? Is it an equilibrium? Well, we have to go back and ask what discrimination is supposed to be. I mean, it's basically using an observable attribute which may be related to personal tastes or some statistical association to make a decision: hire, fire, what type of wage offer. Okay, and then if you can observe an outcome that looks like discrimination, you have to ask, why do we have it? And is it just because of deep-rooted prejudice and primitive tribal whatever feelings, or is there something more economic behind it? And the idea that we're going to try to push today is that maybe it's a two-sided problem. It's not just the presence of bad employers, but it's also the presence of a market where people are facing uncertain prospects of getting a wage offer. So if you're actually from the discriminated group, you may behave differently than if you're not. And that would, it turns out that Black shows this is sufficient to explain what we observe. And, of course, we have this underlying feeling that it's wrong, it's unfair, especially if people are demonstrably equally productive and then they receive different wages or different employment opportunities or different employment prospects, then it's not fair. And then we can go from there. I think judging fairness, again, we want to try to separate the fairness aspects, which we all have possibly a very strong opinion on, from the economic outcome. And then we can, if we want to correct the unfairness, we need to go to the economic roots of the problem. Okay, so there's an underlying sort of straw man out there, which is the sort of the position proposed by the back in the late 1950s by, at the very front, Gary Becker, but also to some extent Milton Friedman, who basically claimed that the market can solve this problem because, well, let me see if you guys might have an idea. Why would the market solve this problem?
Because if you hire based on kind of, I don't know, racial or gender prejudices, or don't hire, and not on the skill of the worker, then you're getting like less good matches for your company and other companies who actually hire the best people that they can get.
Okay, and the ultimate cost would be what?
You go out of business.
Yeah, you'd lose money. You'd have lower profits than those firms that don't discriminate. Because if the underlying presumption is that the distribution of talent, women and men, is equal, and if that's the case, then firms are missing a good business opportunity, and they're just not hiring enough talented women because they could actually do much better. Okay, so that's the same thing is true between whites and blacks. So if there is an equilibrium level of discrimination, it must be because enough people have tastes that they're willing to take that hit. A firm be willing to make a loss for the satisfaction of being able to discriminate. Okay, so the Chicago approach was to say this is probably unlikely because there are a lot of people who don't care about that. They just want to make money. And if they pursue entry in a big enough, if there are enough of those people, then they should drive all these other guys out of business. And we saw some of that in the United States South, but of course, the markets are not perfect. So if you don't have perfect competition, if you can construct a coalition of discriminators, you can actually keep the market entrants out of the business, from entering. So I'm thinking of the behavior of the Cosa Nostra keeping the non-Italian fruit producers from entering certain markets. And you can tell that story. It's not and again, it goes against the Chicago conclusion, and it has to do with market imperfection. So again, if you're dogmatic and believe there's a perfect market out there, then the market should solve these problems as long as people are not, willing to take a hit in terms of their rate of return on their capital, because everyone who owns capital hires workers in a discriminatory way, loses money, and either they will go out of business eventually, or they'll have to have some other source of income to support this discriminatory behavior. So it's a pretty interesting argument. And there's this famous book by Gary Becker in 1957 called The Economics of Discrimination, which basically asserts that if everybody, so you really have to enforce this. I mean, it has to be like a society-wide conspiracy to discriminate against some ethnic group, and that cannot be ruled out. We have places in the world where this happens, and we have the history of the United States as an example of where this happened, and probably may even still happen, but maybe not as persistently as it would have to be to have long-run discrimination. So this is a fairly optimistic view of the world. If the world is allowed to have some competition, knock down the barriers to entry, eventually discrimination will disappear. And I find that a bit hard to believe looking at the history of the world, and not just the United States, but look at Asia, look at Africa. So you have all these examples of people in religious discrimination. Sometimes you can't even look at Ireland, Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants. You can't even really tell by looking at somebody, and they still discriminate. So it's a wonderful economic conundrum that we have to deal with. Okay, so as a result, we looked at this result and spent many years looking at differences in productivity as an explanation for what could explain outcomes. So if you see different wages for whites and blacks or for women and men, it's because maybe we didn't put enough investment in human capital in the low-wage workers. So this has nothing to do with search. It has to do with basically investment, lack investment opportunities were not taken advantage of in society. Basically, the imperfection is somewhere else. You could say, well, why this is an opportunity. You can invest more money in educating females, and this is kind of what happened in across the world over time. Took a while for that to happen, but these can be very slow-moving processes that take a long time to change, especially if you can segregate people in different sectors and then give them different training and say, okay, well, if you're a woman, you can't be a doctor, so we don't have to invest in making you a doctor, and therefore you'll always earn less because you work in a low-wage sector. So this type of occupational segregation or industrial sectoral segregation is one way to explain outcomes that look like discrimination, and there is a lot of that. If you look at even today, the occupational segregation of across race and gender is pretty striking, and it could be also because of convenience. It might be easier for a woman to have a career in education or in the service sector because the hours are less variable, and you can have a family. All these things could also, so in the background there's an explanation of self-segregation, and we have to deal with that as well, and we know the Scandinavian countries have tried to deal with that by direct policies of intervening to help women cross that boundary. But it turns out the subject of today's lecture is that search can also break the Chicago result. Okay, so this is and this, to me, is what makes this model so powerful. It turns out that if you have, and think about all the models we've dealt with until now, we looked at the search model from the employees, with the workers' point of view, and then we looked at the wage posting behavior of employers, and then we tried to put this in an equilibrium together. And well, it turns out that if you have a market where workers ex ante cannot identify discriminators, then you can also get a result that leads ex post to discrimination. So you can actually see people taking advantage of the workers' reaction to an environment of discrimination and paying a lower wage. Okay, so it has to do with reservation wages. It's going to have to do with the probability of the worker facing someone who discriminated against them. So this key paper is by Black, and it's not reviewed in this article that you're supposed to read carefully for the exam, this JEL paper, but it's definitely an important paper. It references many papers that are in that paper. And unfortunately, the notation is a bit off, so I've tried to adapt the notation to this course. And it's kind of based on an earlier paper that looked at self-employment and discrimination. So if you're a self-employed person and you're dealing directly with someone who could discriminate against you, so for example, suppose you're selling sandwiches in a street in one of these cars, and a person doesn't like the way you look, then they could just avoid you, and that would affect your income and your outcome, your equilibrium outcome. And it's not exactly the search model, but it's a model of tastes for discrimination. And if there's some friction that doesn't, maybe there's some spatial reason why there's just a couple of food trucks there, and you can choose which one to go to, then discrimination on the product market could lead to discrimination in compensation. I'm going to talk about the labor market. We're going to talk about our favorite search model and see how far we can get with that. And there's a couple of really simple ideas that drive this model, and then you can make it more fancy. So this model is this is like taking a step back. This is like going back to the middle of the course. We won't have an endogenous wage offer distribution. We'll have the diamond problem. We'll have a spike. If you want to take it really seriously, there's going to be a spike equilibrium. There's going to be a wage that people who are not discriminated against will get, and there'll be a wage that people who are discriminated against will get. So if you wanted to, you could write a master's thesis on putting, directed search, or you could put in here in this case, wage posting with heterogeneous outcomes and full-blown sort of a Burdett-Mortensen type of equilibrium with two different labor markets. So that would be possible. The key thing is if you're of the discriminated type, you cannot change yourself into a non-discriminated type. That's not possible. Okay, so you can't have a gender change operation or change your race. That makes it really hard to get around this. And the question is whether employers in their behavior will undermine the discrimination outcome. That's all we can really hope for in this model. Okay? Because in a more general model, you could have migration, so people could leave. If you're in the American South and you're African American in the late 19th century, your best option was to leave, to move to the north, because that's where there are jobs, high-paying jobs. They were looking for workers, just like Germany's looking for workers today. So you had this mass migration into the cities of northern USA, and because all the freed slaves, they just couldn't avoid being discriminated against especially after the Reconstruction. When the North just gave up the South back to the losers, you know. So, all right. So I'm going to look at a Black's model, which is simple. Two types of workers. Call them A and B. A are the guys that don't get discriminated against. So the men versus the women. The women are B. The discriminated are B. Okay, and you can call it just A and B, so you don't have to attach any value to anything. You just say, okay, there's just an unlucky group. They could be the Sunni and the Shia or whatever you want. It just has to be observable, and then you can act as an employer. You can do something about it. That's the key aspect of this model. And the firms are going to be posting a wage, so it's going to be a little bit like Burdett-Mortensen. It's actually an earlier model by Albrecht and Jovanovic in the 1980s. I didn't teach that model, but it's referenced in this famous paper, and if you're interested, you can look at it. These are all like stepping stones to what we're doing now. So I think it's not important to go into the details, but you'll see what's happening. We're going to have something like an equilibrium wage distribution only because people have different non-pecuniary tastes. So that's going to give us this optical, or this outcome that looks like a distribution, but not in the beauty of Burdett-Mortensen. It's not going to be just because of the friction and the firing, but it's just because some people are willing to work for a lower wage because they really like this job, and some people really hate it, so they need to be compensated. They have to get more. But the point is that the average behavior of both types is the same. So it's just a way of creating some variance. What matters is that you have these two different groupings, and the employers treat them differently. Okay. The cool thing about this model is that despite this heterogeneity at the level of Albrecht and Jovanovic, and this is like our H before it's call it an alpha. You have these different types of employers. So we're going to have two types of employers. We're going to have employers that are fair and treat everyone the same, and you're going to have employers that are prejudiced. So they really do care about A versus B. And this is where the Chicago conclusion was: if you only have some unprejudiced employers, the discrimination equilibrium falls apart, right? That was the free entry would basically, and capacity investment by the unprejudiced would push the prejudiced employers out of business. Now, in this model, that won't happen. Okay, so it is a potential equilibrium where you have the coexistence of prejudiced and unprejudiced employers, and they both can make a profit. They can both find workers, but the prejudice basically are going to reject out of hand anyone from the discriminated group. Okay, so let's call them P and U for prejudice and unprejudiced, and we've got A for the undiscriminated, so the men versus women. Women would be B, or white versus black, or green versus purple. And the mass, think of the mass as the fraction of the total mass of workers, the total number of workers who are out there. So 1 minus gamma would be the mass of those workers who don't have the attribute that it's getting discriminated against, and then gamma would be the discriminated race, religion, or gender. Okay, so that's how we're going to get going. So, and the key thing is that you cannot choose your market. You can't choose your employer. This is random search. So it's a combination of random search and discriminating employers that gives us this outcome. Right? So, and this is the most important parameter, is theta. It's the probability of knocking up, meeting in the bathtub with an employer that's going to be prejudiced. And 1 minus theta is you got lucky, okay? And this is every time you do a search step. So in this model, it's not going to be like the very beginning we did. We had a probability 1 of getting a match or an offer every period. And remember, the next step was to have a random arrival in continuous time. Well, here we're going to have no time. You just have to pay kappa for every time you visit an employer. So it's like the Sargent model, the Lundqvist-Sargent model, where you basically, you collapse time into this sort of number of search steps, but you have to do them sequentially, and you'll have this optimal stopping rule. Okay, so again, the reason I put this at the end of the course is it makes you look back on your notes, and you have to remember all this stuff from the past. There are lots of, remember, time is one reason that search is interesting. It's an investment to search, but if you're impatient, you want to take a lower offer because you're impatient. Well, here, the impatience is kind of summarized in this cost of visiting yet another employer. And if you visit that employer, you get an offer for sure if you're A, but if you're B, you may not get an offer. And then you have to, well, I'll do it again. So if you're a B type worker, you can pay the kappa, and then you meet this racially prejudiced guy who says, no, see you. I don't deal with your type. Okay? So that's the key part of this paper. And therefore, 1 minus theta is like the mass of unprejudiced employers, and that's the chance for the discriminated group to actually get any offer at all. So the higher theta is, the more unlikely it is that they're going to get any sort of decent offer. So you can probably see where this is going. And the underlying idea would be, despite that, workers have the same alpha distribution, so they have the same utility or disutility over the work they're getting, they're performing. So that's not going to be a source. There's no statistical discrimination. The A and the B groups are identical in that respect. It's just this type of prejudice that we're talking about that Black is doing. So it's random search, and then you've got wage posting. So the employer knows everything. The employer knows not which worker is going to arrive today, but it knows the situation. It knows it knows who it's competing with. So it's going to have a wage post that makes sense for it. Okay, and like I said, this is a timeless model, so it's really about paying kappa for yet another shot at it, but that kappa is kind of isomorphic to impatience. So the more impatient you are, the more likely you're going to terminate your search for a given draw. Okay, so that kind of puts everything in perspective. It's going to be a fairly simple model. It's an application of this Albrecht-Jovanovic paper, which does not deal with this. So this was a really kind of a revolutionary paper. It probably doesn't get enough credit. And many people, discrimination is not a really popular thing to work on, although it should be. I'll give you some evidence on this later, but there's a lot of it going on, and this is one way of at least understanding how it could arise, and you'll see what happens in a second. So every time you do another search step, you have to pay kappa, and you basically say, okay, is the draw that I get, again, you might not get anything if you're a B person, but an A person would get a draw every time it pays kappa, and then it would compare the the expected benefits of rejecting and going on, or the benefits of against the cost of paying kappa and doing it again. Okay, so we're going to have a similar, again, think about the cheese model, and I put the cheese model on its head, and the Lundquist Sargent approach. This is kind of that type of model. So the key thing is that if you're an A person and you can't convert into a B person, you can't go to a different market. Remember in the directed search model, you could actually choose your market, and then UA and UB could not be different if A persons could turn into B persons and vice versa. You'd have an equality of expected utility in both markets, but here you cannot. So you're stuck. If you're a B person, you might have a fallback utility that's different from your friend next door. Okay? Yeah.
I think this is a reverse directed search. Like the firms are the one who are directing their search towards certain workers. Yeah.
Not in this model, but you could actually do that. But that would presume that the workers segregate into different markets, and then the firm could actually choose one, the A market or the B market, and that's also not common. It's not legal. Could be. I mean, you could actually have a club. You could just build a labor union, that sort of thing. That's all out of the question here. So it's just it's random search, also from the part of the employers.
Like posting a certain wage, which I think they are able to discriminate. So by posting such a wage, they are already have made their decision. Like they are targeting a certain group. So that's why I think it's like, yeah.
Well, you'll see in this model, he's cooked it so this can't happen. Because the discriminators will never post a wage for the B people. Right? The discriminators, by definition, will never hire anybody, so it's not going to happen. So that market doesn't exist. It would be interesting to think about what would happen if it said, okay, if you're a B person, I'll look at you, but I'm going to pay you a different wage. First, that would be illegal. I mean, if you did it explicitly, if you did it sort of sub rosa, maybe you could figure out a way to model something like that, or try to explain how it could exist. But the Black's model is completely clear on that. There is no market for and there's no wage offer for the B people if you're a discriminator, if you're a P person, P firm. Okay, so that means that the fallback utility for the search problem will be different. Remember, that's the key thing that drives the search model, is how much utility do I get, or how much expected income do I get, because it's the same thing in this model, by being in this labor market and solving this maximization problem, accept or reject, conditional on the distribution. Okay? So this is, again, the wage offer distribution will be trivial in this model, but what matters is you get different utility from it, so your probability of accepting or rejecting will depend on the draw that you get with the match. So when you go into this, you have this date or this interview, and then you pull a value of alpha, and you can see whether the alpha puts you over, given the wage post, whether it puts you over the threshold, and you say, okay, I'll take it. Or you say, nah, it's too noisy here, too loud, too nasty workers next to me, and I don't want to deal with them, that sort of thing. So, and that's common to both A and B workers. That's a very important aspect. Okay, so this like I said, this alpha gives us the heterogeneity that we want to drive the search model. It's a cheap way of doing it, right? It's a cheap way because it means the employer just says 15 euros, and some people say, nah, some people say, yeah, and it depends on their alpha that they have with this particular match. So they're always redrawing it's not like they're getting a wage, they're getting kind of a wage, the posted wage plus this extra bonus or negative bonus of being at this particular job. So again, it's a cheap way. Back then it was very smart. Back in the 1980s, we were still looking for this type of, what's the magic heterogeneity to get the search model to work because of the diamond problem. This model will still have the diamond problem from the The post is still the same, but people's willingness to accept will differ. Yeah.
Is it basically the same thing as saying that workers have different valuations of leisure,
Yeah,
and that's why
yeah.
they accept some wages? And
but it's leisure in this. It's not a persistent. It's just based on the match that you get. So it's leisure at this job, or which is kind of a contradiction, but it's the utility you get from the job, which could involve leisure. Well, maybe the guy lets you watch videos on the job, or you can take lots of breaks. All that kind of stuff is, but the wage is the same.
so then every job offer has a different outcome in this model?
Every job offer has a different outcome depending on the person's realization.
Outcome, because you said that.
No, each match. So it's a job offer for a given worker, yes, right. But all the workers have the same distribution, ex ante, and they meet up and they pull the alpha, and that puts them over the threshold or under the threshold in that particular match. And if they reject it, then they have to go back to the bathtub and get
so
another.
That sounds also distributed.
Yeah, I said that. So that's the CDF is F, capital F. It's a random variable. And it's the distribution is common to all the workers. Okay, so that's a very important aspect. And I'm going to put some restrictions on this CDF. So this is some of the important restrictions to get the model to work for you and not to lead to multiple outcomes and all that kind of stuff. I think this is technical, but it's interesting. This is an assumption that I think is still made in a lot of contexts. Log concavity of F. Okay, it means basically that the inverse Mills ratio is decreasing in this utility, this non-pecuniary utility. So if you think of M as being the ratio of the density to the probability of being over that point, and think of the inverse of that. This thing will be decreasing in alpha. Okay, so it's kind of a restriction on the type of shape of this heterogeneity realization. Just like remember we complained about the Burdett-Mortensen model because it gave us this lousy. So Burdett-Mortensen would violate this condition, but that's we knew that already. This is just kind of a way of rigging it from the start to make sure everything works the way we want. Okay. So this is the key part. Black says basically some but not all employers discriminate. Workers know that there are these discriminators out there, and if you're an A worker, you don't care. If you're an A worker, you're not going to get discriminated. If you're a B worker, any random encounter with an employer might be fine. You get an offer, or you get nothing. The guy just slams the door in your face. And that slamming the door in the face is going to be related to theta, because you're just wandering through the bathtub, and with probability theta, you're going to run into one of these employers, and nothing will happen, and you will have wasted your kappa. Okay, you would have paid kappa for nothing. And workers can't direct their search. So that's another kind of thing I told you before. It's kind of unrealistic because if you have migration, people could move away. If you're being discriminated against, you could emigrate, or you could collect information. Hey, Amazon doesn't discriminate, or Walmart does, or vice versa. Who knows? And then you could basically just go to those employers, and then you could move into sort of a segregated labor market. But we're just going to keep it simple right now. I think it's a nice model, would involve some sort of directed search. And even if it's illegal, strictly speaking, it's difficult to know because you can make up stuff. This happens in Germany. It happens everywhere. People just sort of say, you forgot to you forgot to have 1.5 spacing in your CV, or you didn't put your picture in, or things that are just formalien, sort of just kind of formal excuses. So a lot of employers use that as an excuse to dismiss some people, and it's hard to know that that's really what happened because Yeah, so if you do an application in Germany, make sure you hand in the right form for the CV. Make sure you do everything the employer wants, and sometimes it may help, who knows. So it turns out that the wage offer distribution for the type A worker is fundamentally different than the B worker, because A worker doesn't have this probability of not getting anything. So the distribution, I mean, obviously in this model it's just going to be a spike, but that is a different distribution. And more general model will have the whole distribution being different. Okay, so this is a table to think about it in case you haven't really fully understood. You have two types of workers, A and B, and you have P firms and U firms. And this theta is the mass, the fraction of the unit interval of firms that are prejudiced. So potentially you could have, in a wage posting model, you could imagine firms, and this is why the model is kind of attractive, because you don't have to do all the hard maximization and proof that the equilibrium exists, and you might have some mixed equilibrium. I mean, basically, these prejudiced firms will never hire a B worker. That's just the way it's cooked. So that means that there'll only be one wage offer by the prejudiced firms, and it'll be for those workers that are A. Because upon the interview, they can tell right away it's an A worker versus a B, and they're just prejudiced. Okay, so that's the discriminating offer. And the unprejudiced firms, in principle, could offer two different wages. Okay. And what does that mean? That means that they could post a wage that would reflect the anticipated willingness of the firms, of the workers, to accept or reject that wage. Okay, they could also offer the same wage. Okay, they could also offer the same wage, but is it profitable for them to do that? Because they may know something, they may understand that under these conditions, the B workers might be more willing to accept a lower wage. And this is a wage posting model. So you're facing a supply curve to your firm that is not perfectly elastic. And any monopsonist will try to take advantage of that. That's the key conclusion of the model. So I'm telling you already, that kind of sets it up. See, we just close down that particular offer. So if you're a worker in the bathtub and you're of the B type, you know that with a probability theta, you're going to run into someone who's not going to give you anything. And then you will have paid kappa, and that's kind of costly for you. If you're an A worker, you don't have to worry about that. Okay, and that's going to affect the behavior of the workers. It's going to affect their reservation wages. That's the beauty of the black setup, is that it actually, the unprejudiced firms can basically say, I'm not prejudiced. I'm just maximizing my profits. And I'm offering this wage to the worker, and they're taking it. See? So that's the bottom line of this setup. And we'll see if we can motivate it. All right. So we have this benefit, and these are all assumed to be the same, but of course the B workers will never have a chance to test their feelings about working for a prejudiced employer, because it just doesn't happen. Okay, they just invent some excuse not to deal with them. Okay, so we can think of the problem in the terms of our course. In the terms of our course, there's no discounting now. It's just you pay kappa. It's like being at the slot machine. Put in a quarter or put in a euro, and you hit the button and see what happens. And there's no time involved, but implicitly you could write this model in terms of time, and kappa would be the opportunity cost of waiting a period or something like that. So here, UA is utility in the situation where you have a wage offer that you have to pay kappa to get, and then if you get it, you can choose to maximize staying unemployed, which would give you UA, so it's a recursive setup, and if you get a really nice WA plus alpha, and the random part for you is alpha, you're really fishing for alpha. And that's, a lot of people criticize this model back in the old days because it, you know, workers are looking for the wage, right? But it's still, it gets the point across. I'm very sure that you can reformulate this in more modern wage posting, Burdett and Mortensen terms. But this gets the point across very clearly. So the key thing you should look at is theta. So for the A worker, theta doesn't matter so much. I mean, it's not like they're not going to get anything. They're going to get something. They're going to get an offer. And they might get a different offer. We'll see. We'll see in a second. But we just have to, because again, this is a partial equilibrium. The firm hasn't been looked at yet. The worker is deciding, you know, I'm an A worker. I'm out there. I'm going to run into a prejudiced guy with probability theta, an unprejudiced guy with probability 1 minus theta, and then I got to pay kappa in every case. Okay, so that's a beautiful, beautiful setup. The A worker has no such luck. The B worker basically, with probability theta, goes back into unemployment. So pays the kappa and still has to swim in the bathtub. 1 minus theta, they get an offer, and they get WB. Okay, and they have the same draw as the A-type workers. Their utility on the job that puts them over the hump, and they say, yeah, I'll take it, or not enough. It's a lousy job. The non-pecuniary aspects are enough to deter me to, and I go back into unemployment. Okay. So everyone's got the same density of disutility or utility over this particular offer that they're getting at that particular point in time. Yeah.
I just do not understand why the unprejudiced firm can discriminate. I mean, why does it offer A and B wages?
Because it's profitable. It could be profitable to do so. I'll just leave it open right now. Okay, it could be profitable to do so. I mean, you know, in economics, one of the hardcore rules is if I give you 2 instruments, don't throw away one. Even if you think you only need one, maybe using 2 could help. Because if you tie your hand and you only have one hand to use, so you know, if you're trying to maximize profits, you probably want to, and there's no explicit discrimination. You know, I mean, well, we'll see in a second. We'll see. And the cool thing about this is that the poor B worker doesn't have a chance to actually get a wage offer from A, right? From the wage offer that A workers would get if they landed at the prejudiced firm. Okay, so we can solve for this, and this is just an application of what we did before in gory detail. So you end up getting a utility value. This is like solving for U, okay, and it implies it's a function of all the different possible values of WA and WB that could be posted. For the UA worker, the UA is only going to get WA offers because it's an A worker, and all the uncertainty comes from the worker's own personal judgment over right. This is a single offer, but you like it or you don't like it because of the non-pecuniary aspects. So the integration for this formula takes place over DF. You know, it's the shape of the tastes over this particular match, over all matches, since it's a repeated, it's a stationary density. Okay, but the key thing is you see right away that the denominator has this theta in it. Okay, because it's going to, and because we've assumed that the utility of the worker over these 2 different types of job, we're keeping it general because you might actually have a different utility of working for a prejudiced employer as opposed to a non-prejudiced, and that Black leaves that open, but you could say that's the same. In any case, you have to factor in this probability that it's acceptable Okay, so that would be this lower part, and then you've got, and that's the reservation level of utility given W, U, and W, A, U. Okay, so that for the unemployed B worker has no such option. It's basically all coming from the unprejudiced employers, and it will look like that. All right, so you have, again, two different wage offers, the prejudiced wage offer and the unprejudiced wage offer. And the unprejudiced wage offer will be the only one that the B worker actually gets to see. So then all we have to do now is kind of solve for the reservation levels of quality of the match that will provoke the worker to accept or reject. Okay, because, you know, the reservation quality level is the indifference condition that we had before. Remember, before we worked with the wage. The wage has to be at least that gives you enough utility to make you indifferent between unemployed and working at that very low wage. Okay, so it turns out that is simply for the A guy who has the probability of getting either type of offer, right? And you can see you've got this sum of, expected utility is the sum of the two probabilities assigned to the respective outcomes. And that's going to be equal to the marginal cost of this extra job interview search step, or we're going to call it this kappa. Okay, so it's a classic equality of a marginal search step, right? Expected benefit equals expected costs. And therefore, if you want, this is some background idea, you have to be induced to participate. So this might be so lousy that nobody wants to join the labor market. So this background utility of, say, household production or something, this fallback is exceeded. That's just to make sure that everyone believes that this model has an equilibrium where people actually do work and search. Okay, so it's not really a compelling or very surprising assumption. You need that to make this thing work. Under those conditions, basically, you can show that increasing the wage offer to a person who's of A type will increase utility, okay, but it won't increase it one for one. Okay, and that's the same thing is true for a non-discriminating firm as well. So they're both going to have a sensitivity of utility. Remember, utility is measured in terms of pecuniary and non-pecuniary benefits of being unemployed. It's the reservation level of utility I need to accept. It's less than one, strictly less than one in both cases. And you can show that the number of discriminating firms has an ambiguous effect on the level of utility. It turns out that if you have higher wage-paying firms will have a higher level of utility, if and only if the wage offer that discriminating firms make is exceeding the wage offer they make that the undiscriminating firms make, or the non-prejudiced firms make. Okay, so it's kind of like if the wage offer by the discriminators exceeds the wage offer made by the non-discriminators, then and those firms that pay higher wages will give higher utility to those who are not discriminated against. Okay, so that's kind of one of the non-serious or disturbing consequences. What's really more interesting about this model is the consequences for the B workers, because the B workers are the ones that are facing this, this probability theta of meeting a brick wall. They get nothing. Okay, so the difference condition, again, as before, to find this reservation level of utility, again, given the wage offer they get, how much pleasure do I need to get out of the job in non-pecuniary terms to make me accept it? And there's the condition. So you see that theta disappears because theta is times 0, so it's gone. So all you have left is basically a chance of 1 minus theta. So you can see that 1 minus theta is important. The larger 1 minus theta is, the more likely it is I'm going to have a lot of utility from having a, I'm going to, you know, be more likely I'm going to accept a job. If you do the comparative statics on this equation, you end up getting a unit effect of the offer wage on utility. Okay, so that means that, first off, it means that the employer can actually, he's facing a less elastic supply of labor, or in terms of acceptance probability, than it would in a case of, for the the prejudice firm. And the more employees who discriminate in the form of alpha, in the form of theta, the lower the reservation utility is for the discriminated. So the more discriminators out in the market there are, the lower the reservation level of utility is going to be for the discriminated workers. So their readiness to accept a job will increase. They'll be less likely to search for further offers. It's called the desperation effect. Okay, so the more discriminators there are, again, and theta is strictly not equal to 1 or 0, so there are going to be some fair non-discriminators out there, but the more discriminators there are out there that are perceived by the discriminated, the more likely they are to accept a job offer. Okay, and what does that mean? That means that the supply of labor to the firm that is not discriminating will become less elastic, so they have an opportunity to practice their monopsonistic power. So they will have, to maximize their profits, they will probably push down a little bit on the wage. Even though they say they're not discriminating, they'll just say, look, I offered this wage and they accepted it. I'm not discriminating, I'm giving him a job. I'm giving her a job. Right? So it's, and that, the beauty of this model is all that willingness to accept comes from the utility that's not related to the wage. So you don't have to look at the wage distribution. You just post a wage for these people and say, look, they accepted it. I'm not discriminating against them. Okay, so that's the gist of this model. You have lower reservation utility, lower reservation wage effectively, because the reservation wage can be thought of as the posted wage minus the utility of the particular match. So those people are more likely to accept wages, and if they are, then it means the firm will probably, in maximizing its profits, will try to take advantage of that. So you'll end up having different potential wages for, well, you'll certainly have a lower wage for the B worker. Okay, so that, you can also back out the number of search steps in expectation, because, again, you always have to, you can't make a fractional search step, but you can think of if you're unemployed, what is the average number of steps or number of times you pay kappa to get an offer in the market. And it's going to be related to both theta and the distribution, okay, for this reservation wages. Looks very familiar to us from the original search models. So you can see that the theta increasing will, ceteris paribus, raise NB, but it will also affect alpha B. Alpha B is the reservation utility level or quality level that person needs to have to accept a job. So that will also be endogenous. So alpha B depends on theta. Okay, so it's not enough just to say, oh, I see, theta goes up. And therefore, NB goes up because you have an offsetting effect. Increasing the number of discriminators means that search effort will fall. I mean, you're kind of getting desperate, so you won't invest in more search. Search effort means how many times you actually pay the kappa. So if you think of search effect, the net effect, the effect on N, the number of search steps in expectation, it's ambiguous. Just crudely increasing theta would make you more likely to search more because, well, you know, I'm keep running to this brick wall. Maybe I should visit more places, but I'm getting desperate, so I'm going to accept lousy job conditions at the posted wage. Okay, so it's an ambiguous effect. That's the key thing, and that's consistent with a lot of evidence on search effort by discriminated groups, women, African Americans, et cetera, in the United States. That it's not clear which way it should go. Yeah.
And increasing theta reduces the search effort because higher theta means that even the non-discriminating firms will offer you lower wages, so you'll accept, or you're happier in unemployment compared to what you would get if you were employed. I don't know.
Yeah, your alpha B goes down. Okay, so
I'm just
yeah.
trying to get my head around.
No, it's right. It's classic. It's called desperation effect, or you know, your frustration. Desperation is probably the right intuition. The key thing is that they're offsetting effects, and there's no a priori reason to think that one dominates. And you have to use empirical evidence you have to use some sort of evidence on search effort, which is hard. I mean, how do you measure search effort? You can ask people how many times did they visit an employer, and again, some people, you have to talk to people who already have jobs because those are the successful ones, and you have to know how many times did they visit job because they actually got a job, and they were, you know, you want to know, to find out this NB, you need to find out how many times did they search before they got a job. So that's the key thing you have to worry about. Now, so we discussed a lot about the worker and the acceptance and the search intensity, the reservation level of utility, because this is not a reservation wage model, strictly speaking. It's a reservation pecuniary benefit of the job. So it includes this, and again, it's really for simplicity purposes. It's really a. So now let's think about what the firm does. The firm wants to maximize profits. The firm's just doing its job, right? Operating for the owner of the firm, capitalist, and for the unprejudiced employer and the prejudiced employer, we're going to assume that every worker has the same productivity. So we rule out the usual excuse that, well, these B people, they're not very productive, therefore I pay them less. We're not going to do that. They all have the same productivity. You could make them different, okay? But we're not going to do that. The only thing that's different is the wage. So the unprejudiced employer has the freedom to post a different wage. Now this may be illegal, okay? So it's just showing the incentive of the worker to try to do this somehow, okay? So if you think about it, it's really trying to find out, does it make sense for a firm that really doesn't discriminate? Maybe they should still do something that takes advantage of this desperation of the discriminated people in the market. So that's the interesting thing about this. I mean, I don't think this is like advocating any sort of discriminating policy. It's just trying to show you that the firm has an interest in increasing profits, taking advantage of this situation. And I think that's already very powerful. It's a very powerful message. Okay, and remember, the prejudiced guys only employ A, so they're already kind of, they're shooting themselves in the foot if they, if their profitability depends, as in Burda and Mortensen, on the probability of getting workers, they're sending away workers who are just as productive, so they are paying a price, right? They're paying a price for this crazy behavior because these workers are exactly as productive by assumption, and if they're not, then it's a different model. Yeah.
Isn't that also discrimination?
I said that, yeah. I'm just trying to, I think Black was trying to show that the incentive is powerful to do this. And if you can get away with it, right, you can make it a promotion system, or you can say, well, I have this bonus, but I'm only going to give the, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, the incentives to do it are there because, not because this guy is racially prejudiced or gender prejudiced, it's just because the guy wants to maximize profits and knows that there's a monopsony situation for these types of workers. That's really what's going on. So it's a subtle point. I mean, a lot of people don't get it, but they're usually not economists. You're just trying to show how this pervasive incentive to take advantage of other people's behavior, right? Okay, so now this is where it gets interesting. Why? I mean, he just said it. Is it fair? No. Okay, but in a market where the A workers have any sort of ability to direct their search, then you'd expect these wages to be the same. Okay, so that, you could also say, well, maybe they could segment as well, and, you know, but the power for that equality of the A post wage is pretty strong, right? The other one, there are no discriminated workers at the prejudiced firms, so there's nothing to compare to. So I think that's another thing Black was trying to take advantage of. So the equilibrium condition he's going to impose now is that at least for the A workers, they get the same wage because they can, in some sense, direct their search more effectively, because the other firms don't hire anybody. They just figure out some way to kick them out, keep them out. So again, this is a simplification. It's another simplification, equilibrium condition. But in the end, in equilibrium, if this is the case, then it has to be the case that the unprejudiced firms pay the disadvantaged group, the discriminated group, differently. Okay, it's just the incentives are very powerful to do that. So again, it may be illegal, like we said, it may not be fair, maybe there'll be unrest in the firm, maybe the workers have a certain ideology, all workers should be paid equally, and blah, blah, possible. But again, the incentive, the pressure is there. And this is only because firms have this monopsony power. So it all derives from this monopsony power. They're wage setters. They face a less than perfectly elastic supply curve. Remember, in the monopsony model, even if you don't have search, the whole point comes from the fact that the worker, when the workers supply their labor, an individual firm does not have the ability to cut wages and not drive everyone away. In a competitive market, an epsilon wage cut means that there are no workers at all, period. And that's a very extreme, atomistic competition. The paradigm model we teach undergraduates, right? But it's, in fact, in labor markets, it's probably the wrong model. So every firm has the ability to set wages a little bit within some band of action, and that's Joan Robinson. So it's the Joan Robinson model of imperfect competition in the factor market. Okay, so that means that any firm that can, and again, we've seen that the search model gives us this on a plate. It gives us on a silver platter. It gives us this conclusion that firms, because of the friction, have this little tiny bit of monopsony power, and they can possibly take advantage of it. Okay, and the search friction is what confers the market power, and they receive this chunk of action denied them because of this discrimination. So it's a differential friction that gives rise to this outcome. You know, if it's obvious, right? If I made theta if I made theta equal to 1, the model would be trivial. It wouldn't matter anymore because there'd be no more discrimination. So, you know, one improvement of the Black model would be to figure out a way to make theta endogenous. maybe through collective action or legal restrictions, maybe because of profits. Maybe the equilibrium profits of the B and the A firms are different, because we haven't looked at the complete equilibrium, because clearly if the discriminating firm has, there will be different, we haven't made any assumption about entry and exit, so there might be differential levels of profit for the two types of firms, and therefore in equilibrium, maybe all the A firms, all the P firms go out of business and the U firms dominate, but it's not clear in this model. It's not clear at all, because we haven't made that comparison yet, but it's clearly possible for the firms to survive. And it's possible that depending on the value of theta, there'll be less or more entry. And again, entry's not going to be modeled right now, but you could probably think of that as an interesting extension of the model. And maybe with capital investment, you can compensate. There's a rate of return on capital, all these things. Okay, so that's the black model. And I'm going to talk about, what I want to do is, we can have some discussion now if you want. We can go back and think about this model a little bit, or I can tell you what I'm going to do next week. And next week I'm going to go back to macro, the very beginning of the course. We're going to look at Pissarides again, okay? And we'll think of some of the, and this is the kind of picture I want you to think about. But maybe I should go back and ask if there are any questions about the black model and its spin-offs. I mean, this is kind of set as an inspiration for all the different spin-offs you could imagine. You could take this to the Burnett-Mortensen world. You could have no differential utility of the job, or persistent values of leisure like we had in the Burnett-Mortensen extension. You could just imagine there's only this friction. And then you've got this additional problem that you can run into discriminating firms. And the question is, could you still have an equilibrium distribution of wage offers if firms sort of align themselves with different wage offers across a distribution, all maximizing profits and having different expected values of profits given their wage post, right? So it'd be like Burnett-Mortensen and layering on this discrimination. So that's one possibility. You could also add productivity differences, and it gets really kind of complicated. Or you can try to model the equilibrium that I just discussed before. The idea that the firm, in the black paper, they go into some more detail on the profitability of the two, and under what conditions would you have an equilibrium where expected profits are the same. So you need to close this model correctly, you need to have some condition that adjusts that will feed back onto the wage offer so that both firms can coexist in equilibrium. And it's not impossible to do that, but it's not clear that all firm equilibrium situations can be supported by this model. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, so you can see this is like an interesting dimension for future work. So what I'd like to think about now is this picture. So I put this together last night. This is very interesting. So what is this?
Theta.
Exactly, it's theta. Okay, so why can't I make this big? Can you see it? Yeah, you can't see it. Okay, I was gonna try to draw theta, but I don't think I can. I was gonna do this. Yeah. Stift. So it's not the theta from Black's model. It's the theta from Pissarides, Mortensen-Pissarides. So to me, this is, if you look at Germany, it's even more striking, because Germany has Arbeitskräftemangel, shortage of workers.
But is the dip as deep in Germany as it is here?
What's deep?
The,
Steep?
the
It's
dip
yeah.
in 2020?
No, because in fact, the interesting thing is what caused. You have to do this properly. You have to look at the underlying. Maybe I even have those. I could probably even show you those. No, I probably can't. I plotted them. Maybe. Let's see where they be. No, they're gone. Ah. Call up the chronic here. Where is it? So. Okay, so here's unemployment in the United States. This is unemployment. This is the denominator. Okay, and the numerator.
I think it's still just the same picture that we had before. From the
It is? No, it shouldn't be. Okay. That's absolutely possible. Okay. Okay, so that's unemployment. That's you in the United States. In Germany, it didn't rise as much. It didn't rise much at all, but V did move. Okay, so next week I'll produce the theta for Germany. But the interesting thing is to look at the other one, because it's not just you. It's about V divided by U. That's the real. It's an excellent measure. I was just really inspired by this last night. It's a really inspiring picture of labor market tightness in the United States. So let's look at JOLTS, job opening, total private. Okay, so this is to give you an idea that even in the United States there's kind of a very strong secular trend in job posting. This is V, total V. So what I showed you in the slide was the ratio of V to U, and this is the total number of job openings. So you can see that after the pandemic there was almost an overexpansion of the on trend. And the U.S. is now, because of the recent probably tightening of the Federal Reserve of monetary policy by the Fed. You've had some sort of, but it's still very tight, and by trend it's very tight. Yeah, so
the unemployment is still going down, right?
unemployment is still going down as a rate, and
inflation is going down.
well, it's not clear. It has fallen last month, but I'm not so sanguine. But again, that's something we'd like to talk about because it's part of the macro picture. You can see that despite despite the monetary policy moves, we haven't had a recession yet. So if the historical picture, if you use Wanted index, you get a similar picture going back to the 1940s. For some reason, this is what you'd want to. I mean, you can focus on. So you can focus on this as the last representative recession, if you like, say. So that's the Great Recession. That's the kind of fluctuations. And remember we talked about the Scheimer puzzle at the very beginning? Thomas probably talked about it with you. The fact that it's very hard to get macro models to deliver this kind of fluctuations in the quantities, because the Mortons and Pizzeri's model allows for a very sort of wage is very flexible, and when there's a good productivity shock, wage rises, and there's a bad when it falls, and it sort of that doesn't seem to be right. So one way of explaining this would be that wages are kind of rigid, and the pandemic is a great example, right? So and a lot of Americans left the labor force or lost their jobs.
Are there different rigidities comparing to in a recession compared to the time after the recession? Because it seems like the drop is always steeper than the recovery, right?
Yeah, that's right, and I think that's a very good point. We have this. If firms post wages, it's likely they will be kind of rigid downward. So to get wages to be cut, you'd have to have some extremely well-placed pressure on workers. They usually don't accept that, and they may leave. Let me show you another picture. It's very interesting since we're showing pictures today. This one will strike you as well. Let's see. This is another very interesting one. This is U.S. labor force participation. So this is, yeah, sorry. Okay, so this is to show you how important it is to think about the extensive margin of participation. This is the pandemic, right? And this is obviously a lot of people lost their jobs, but they also left the labor force. And they didn't come back. So in America, there's a huge discussion of this gap here that hasn't been closed yet as of January 2022, pretty much. Yeah, January 23. So there's this lost group of people are people probably who have left certain sectors that are risky in terms of health, or they don't pay enough. So restaurants, hospitality, personal services. It may not be just due to the corona risk. It's also just poor pay and maybe an income effect or a wealth effect of getting paid lots of money for during the corona period. There was quite a few transfer payments paid, which affect labor supply, as we know, reduce labor supply. So all that kind of feeds into this narrative of changing behavior. If you look at Europe, you don't see this. So I was just very curious. Last picture I'll show you today is the one for Europe. The same kind of concept. This is Europeans call it the activity rate. It's like the labor force participation rate. So you see kind of a drop, but you see a recovery. I don't think it's just because Europeans have a different attitude towards corona. I think it maybe has to do with the underlying job conditions, but it's something people should really look into. So in terms of what I was interested in, maybe next week we'll talk about macro, the way this all feeds back into the macro picture, labor market tightness. The European labor market tightness indicator is similar to the one in the United States in the sense of that it's kind of whipsawing back and forth, but not as much as in the United States. Okay, so yeah, I'll see you next week. We'll be all done, and yeah, have a nice week.